About a year ago, a publication entitled 3D Gaussian Splatting for Real-Time Radiance Field Rendering appeared. It's about a technique that produces static but navigable 3D reconstruction of video footage. Spatial Interrogations, or The Color of the Sky, by Artur Neufeld, presents a video essay and gives insight into its technical and artistic background. Artur?
Hey. Hi, and thank you for being here. I'm Artur Neufeld, an artist from Hamburg. I have a background in graphic design, fine arts, and I'm also a self-taught web developer. But this talk is not about me or my work in general, but about a specific work I did. But before we get there, I want to give you some context of why and where this project started. 6 months ago, I was asked to participate in a local group exhibition here in Hamburg. The exhibition was called The Backrooms, and it took place in a rundown office building. Only the first floor of the building was converted a year ago, maybe 2 years ago, and now artists are using the first floor as studios and workshops. The other floors have been gutted though, and on some floors you can still find the remnants of a former Grand Hotel. The exhibition took place on the 6th floor, a former office space. It's one of a few floors that still has carpeting in there, though all other things have been removed. Some walls were torn down, there's grime on the floor, all radiators were pulled off. The whole building is basically abandoned, just waiting for investors to redetermine its purpose. On this floor, however, there was also evidence of previous squatters, such as children drawings on the walls, clothesline, or sticker on the wall. So conceptually, this exhibition space fits perfectly with the theme of the backrooms, as in the internet meme of the endless, liminal space that you can glitch into at any moment, leaving the constraints of reality. Personally, I was more interested in the space as an in-between space, where its functionality was blurred by the past and made anxious by the future. So I just quickly went through some photos from the exhibition just to give you some context, some impressions, and just to set the scene. Because as said, this talk is about a piece of work I made for that exhibition. It is a 15-minute-long video essay about how digital reconstruction technology may mirror how we ourselves remember. And when I prepared this talk, I was thinking to myself that it's only making sense to talk about something that everyone has already seen. So my first impulse was to just show the whole thing. But I think the video works well if you watch it at home or in the context of an exhibition. But I don't think it's a kind of video that works well in a format like this. So I'm going to try something different instead. I will show you the beginning and later the end of the video and fill in the remaining gaps during this talk. But you can always watch the whole thing later if you want to. I will display a link and a QR code at the end. That being said, I want to start by showing you the very first 5 minutes, so just to have something to talk about.
The sky above is the color of a JPEG, compressed into unrecognition. It is said that the opening line of a good story should be a good summary of the world it builds. However, the worlds we are interrogating in this story were already built. They were archived as digital embers, embedded in the eroding layers of our shifting memorized landscape. We are future art historians trying to dissolve the cross-sections and fringes of our attempts to digitize reality. It is July 2023. A paper called 3D Gaussian Splatting for Real-Time Radiance Field Rendering suggested a novel method to capture reality in 3D from video footage. 3 months later, the first apps hit the market. You capture your surroundings in a video from several points of views, send the data to their servers, and get back a 3D representation of your scene. This scene is made up of Gaussian splats. These Gaussians exist in a liminal space between point and volume. Abstract entities that carry information about position, color, opacity, and form. This rendering process subverts traditional expectations, differing from neural radiance fields or photogrammetry. First, pixel data from video motion is statistically compared to generate depth and perspective. Splats form where the data density is highest and adapt. They shrink or grow where needed. They are reproducing by mitosis or are cannibalizing their neighbors in a computational struggle until those that best approximate reality are left. The remains will be rasterized back onto an image plane. This process is not about precise geometry, but rather the essence of the space through overlapping stochastic distributions. The gaps and uncertainties become just as crucial as the data points themselves. It's a rendering approach that gains speed by embracing ambiguity. In this, memory finds its uncanny digital mirror. Most of the user-generated content in these apps are quick tests, people trying the app once, scanning their desk, bedroom or partner, uploading the data to the cloud. But there is always a central detailed subject in the scene. It is clear what the point of interest worth capturing was. By design, the amount of time and attention a user spends on video capturing correlates to the amount of detail rendered in the splat scene. In a way, this spatial distribution of detail does feel like an echo of memory's selective focus. At the center of our recollections, you tell yourself stories with searing clarity, a lover's smile etched in light, a mother's woes carved in shadow. Outside these focal points, our ability to recall will begin to blur the periphery, the details, the facts. They are rendered as impressionistic strokes of emotion and atmosphere, their ghosts at the fringes either hiding in a perpetual peripheral drift or being masked in saccades in plain sight. Our minds dutifully translate phantom signals into stories, compartmentalizing the raw truths they process while presenting a soft, warm bed to lay in. What remains are feelings, fuzzy beliefs of what we deem truths, ashen waters of what could have beens. Faraway realities compressed into unrecognition. It's a rendering approach that gains speed by hiding ambiguity. Where the hierarchy of memory is passed by perceived importance in a black box we call subconsciousness, the splats, computerized reality weaving, relies on a simpler truth. The convergence of viewpoints determined by the unsentimental calculations of gradient descent. But still, in this quiet approach, they may have also approximated a part of the nature of remembrance. The gaps and uncertainties are just as crucial as the data points themselves.
So, I think some part of the video was cut off, but I hope it was fine anyway. So, we will be coming back to the second half of that clip later, so keep that in mind. The first half of this clip was rather technical, maybe even dry, but I think it is important to explain the meaning of the visuals you have seen. All footage you have seen were made with something called Gaussian Splatting, and it is a way of generating 3D data from video footage, proposed in a paper from 2023. Instead of polygons forming three-dimensional surfaces, this approach renders the data points as so-called splats. So I will oversimplify a bit, but to give you a rough idea, one traditional way of creating 3D models is to use polygons or triangles. So a lot of triangles are used to represent the volume or surface of an object. A splat, however, is a little bit different. A single splat holds information about position, so its location in 3D space, about color, which is just an RGB value, about something called covariance, so how much it is scaled, skewed, and rotated, and opacity. They form these ellipsoids that are kind of blurry at the edges. So in practice, multiple of these splats are drawn at once. So if you would actually want to render something, you would overlap like 7 million of these splats, and you will get something like this. And if you render them fully opaque, I think they are, you can see them a bit clearer. There's also another component to these splats called spherical harmonics coefficient, which changes in appearance from different angles, mimicking something like specular light. I think you can see it best here in the reflection of a cutlery. That's also why Gaussian splatting often works well with transparent or reflecting objects. But when it comes to reflections in, let's say, a mirror, you have to keep in mind that there is no actually rendering happening for reflections. Instead, the objects are just duplicated and mirrored. That's just how the underlying so-called structure from motion algorithm works. It's a statistical method that is oblivious to the actual physical reality. It just compares pixel data from the input video and generates points in space, a point cloud. The first time I saw this approach to reflections was in computer games from the early 90s, but the illusion works just as well now as it did then. Because when we look at these splats in isolation again, they lose their magic. They are actually just that, blobs of color of different shapes. They gain their magic only in relation to each other. They blend and overlap. They accumulate where the data densities are highest. This is also the part of an algorithm that has a splash of AI in the mix, or at least if you consider gradient descent AI. In this optimization process, the splats are allowed to grow or shrink or combine or decide to no longer exist. As long as this process gets closer to the ground truth, they change until their sum approximates reality, or in this case, a static version of the original video footage in 3D. The process shown here is also normally hidden, as in you normally only share the finished pre-calculated scenes. But I think it's really interesting to look behind the curtain, to see what's going on inside the black box, to see how the splats emerge, evolve, overlap, and converge into a form that we then recognize without questioning it. The cool thing about this rendering approach is that it's fast. It takes a couple of minutes to generate and can be displayed in real time, even in a browser. As mentioned in the clip from earlier, it took approximately 3 months for 3D reconstruction and pseudo social media apps to implement the algorithm from the original paper. Specifically, Luma AI and Polycam adopted it early, and I got most of my footage from Polycam. I call them pseudo-social media apps because the app itself is the tool you use to generate the scenes, but they allow you to upload your splat scenes publicly so that other people can experience your memories in 3D, like them, share them, comment on them, or download them. So that's what I did. I built a little web scraper and a Chrome extension what would get all the necessary data and archive it in a simple database, just so I could review them later. It was quite easy to get the data, as their Next.js framework showed the data from their API points clearly in the document. So I got a hold of the raw splat files as well as the associated metadata. Every day, like 10 to 20 new files were uploaded. So I spent a lot of time just browsing through new and old scenes. In the end, I had around 120 hand-picked scenes that first caught my attention. And I think the aesthetic itself just fascinated me. It felt raw and natural in a way, but also digital and precise. A combination of attributes I rarely witness nowadays. So that fascination was the bedrock of the essay. I just knew that I wanted this to be my material of choice. I wanted to look closer. I wanted to actually take a step into the scenes. I thought the only medium that could do that was virtual reality. And as said, the splat scenes themselves run in a browser. And that is the turf I'm familiar with as a web developer. So I developed a little Free.js web app to display the splat scenes in VR. So just walking through them already felt eerie and strange, getting so close and personal to the memories of strangers. And strange is a good keyword here, as some of the scenes were indeed personal. My present felt kind of intrusive. Someone may have just tested the app and quickly made a scene of their room, but getting close to the scene in VR, you could see into connected rooms, you could see people unaware of being captured in the background, or even read the package of prescription medicine that was left unintentionally on the desk. So that initial eeriness stayed with me, and that was when I decided to make a video essay out of this material, to look at it again through the eyes of a videographer. That meant that I needed a digital viewfinder, so I attached a virtual camera to my right controller and found a way to record these videos. I mixed handheld camera movement with calculated dolly shots to mirror the difference between this eerie feeling of intrusion and an objective documentation. I also tried to be careful with what I show. I didn't want to put too much focus on the people in the scenes. It's not about them in particular, or the content of the scenes. For me, it's more about the media itself. I also try to underline the connection between eeriness and technical documentation with the sound design. I reuse a couple of scenes throughout the video deliberately, and each time they reappear, their soundscape is a bit altered. There's also one piece of music that I reuse. It's a piece by Franz Liszt from 1881. And I did a lot of research to find a suitable piece of music that would fit what I had in mind. And as luck would have it, the title of the piece, which was Grey Clouds, even corresponded to my own title. So in the next part of the video that comes after the clip I showed earlier, the same music appears again, but it's distorted this time. It's slowed down, its pitch is reduced, and the impressionistic strokes that from earlier are now abstract drones in the background. This is because in part 3, the focus shifts away from the center and away from the subjects. The video examines the aesthetic of the splat scenes. As said, the data density and therefore the quality of the reconstruction is highest where the user pointed their camera the most. So there's always a central point of interest in the scene, a subject that consists of both data and detail. This reflects what people, or in this case the original videographer, considered important enough to capture, creating a kind of digital hierarchy of attention. It's also a déjà vu of earlier reality rendering methods. But instead of the subjects sitting still for the painter or a camera's exposure, the subjects have to wait in place until the videographer has shot them from all angles. So naturally, a lot of the content on these apps are scenes of their partners. Are scenes of their family. Or just scenes of their friends. Or just quick scenes of what was around them at the time, like their computer, their workstations, their bedrooms, their living rooms, their devices and pets, But other use cases was also, I came across, were also like mappings of lands, plots, and buildings, or even archaeology sites. And speaking of archaeology, some people even used footage from video games to reconstruct scenes. So these archived virtual landscapes have, in some form at least, also archaeological properties, in my opinion. And I don't know why, but that use case surprised me the most, to be honest. Sometimes the process also just fails, most often because the input videos weren't suitable. The clip was too short or there was too much movement. But sometimes even these failed attempts are uploaded, and I think these are interesting too. But I often found that I'm more interested in the things that the content creator didn't think were important. I still remember when I loaded this scene into the VR app because in the center of attention is evidently the woman. That's also what the automated algorithm determining the thumbnail in the app was suggesting. But when I entered the scene and looked behind me, I saw this tree and the outskirt of the city. And for me, this frame, this situation was more important, or at least more interesting. The situation had a quality to it I normally feel when I'm myself out there photographing. It was something that caught me off guard. I just remembered the thumbnail from the database and my earlier explorations, but I forgot the rest of the scene. And here you can see how the level of detail is reduced in the background the further you move away from the origin of attention. At the fringes of the scene, the splats fall apart. They cling to their best approximation, but fail to approximate. They just try to do their best, really. The algorithm tries to extrapolate from limited data points, filling in the gaps as best as it can. But it doesn't quite get there, resulting in these isolated, fuzzy splats. So the splats reach a maximum distance and create this sort of dome shape. This is also where the color of the sky is rendered in the splat scenes. It just clings there, overlapped and merged with distant objects. The hierarchy of attention has a clean cut there. The algorithm just has to clamp the distance somewhere, otherwise the data would be too far away and show the gaps and uncertainties in the approximation. It would break the illusion. I found that interesting and fascinating. So there are several levels of details in the scenes, slowly dissipating towards the fringes of attention. One of the main topics of the video is how this technical limitation inadvertently mimics how I think we remember things sometimes. So, speaking of, do you remember the second part of the clip from earlier I asked you to keep in mind? Or is it a bit fuzzy? You might remember one thing from the clip, something that resonated with you, a sentence, a sound, or nothing specific at all, but rather a feeling that stuck. Because that's the funny thing about memory, most of the time what's left is more a feeling and not facts. Just try to remember last week's lunch or a decision you made a decade ago. Most of the time, it's more like a recalculation of the past, a condensate that we feel is true and immutable, but mostly it's just made up of feelings frozen in gaps. It's the rendering in the present of a personal reality of the past that is shaped by nurture, experience, and subconsciousness. Just a couple steps further, those feelings fall. They become imprecise and fuzzy and show their gaps and uncertainties. But you can only see these gaps when you challenge them, because it is harder to do that with your own memories than it is with splat scenes. So both approaches to rendering reality build on this element of ambiguity, though one hides it and the other embraces it. Having said that, let's go back to the video part of the video essay. I already anticipated some of the aspects of the next clip, but we will pick up there anyway. The next clip is the last 3 minutes of the video essay.
In the act of remembering, we reconstruct. Each recollection is a recalculation, not of what truly was, but of what remains within us. They are echoes, recontextualized and reframed. A blend of truth, a curated feeling and a splat of the unknown are rendered as our personal reality. They are rendered as impressionistic strokes of emotion and atmosphere. The gaps and uncertainties become just as crucial as the data points themselves. This ambiguity is intentional and carves room for fuzzy feelings of sharp nostalgia. It's the space in which the flags used to be greener and the sky more blue. An echo chamber of what-ifs that either feeds larger egos or deepens uncertainties. It's the place where your past self could have achieved all these things, given the right circumstances. In these bounds, the version you imagine yourself to be in finds the room to oscillate so much in your judgment. It's a recalculation of a recollection. Extrapolating from data points is easy. The patterns are more predictable the warmer an already made bed is. This applies to the training data of a generative reality, as well as to the experience of a personal reality. Both rendering methods are virtual and run on nostalgic, pre-trained software. Both are extrapolating from gaps and uncertainties. But in this haze of reconstruction and perpetual interrogation, we can just keep on searching for anchors of authenticity and truths. So, somewhere, back there in the archives of our ambered minds, I am sure, somewhere there, the colour of the sky surely remains lossless.
Okay, so far in the video essay, all the footage was from Gaussian splat scenes. But in this last scene, I used another layer of technological reconstruction. I took keyframes from earlier in the video and fed them into an image-to-video AI. The AI then extrapolated its own version of reality from these still frames. Basically, it creates an illustrative moment of the personal reality I'm referring to, by filling in the gaps, much as our minds do with memories sometimes. For example, earlier in the video, I talked about the woes of a mother, and here, the personal reality that is imagined by the AI shows a different kind of truth. But I think it creates an interesting parallel when I talk about how we reconstruct our personal reality. The AI is literally reconstructing the scenes, making its own assumptions about what might have happened before and after each moment. Just like feelings about past memories feel harsher when we examine them late at night than they feel in the morning with a sober mind. Like our own memory process, it's extrapolating from nostalgic, biased datasets, creating a plausible but potentially inaccurate continuation of reality. So using AI as a tool here allowed me to illustrate this shift in perspective. It served as a placeholder, an anonymous lens that just shows one potential version of a personalized reality. Here again, it's less about the content or the subjects, but about the inherent way this media operates. Okay, so what I have not shown yet are the actual last 2 minutes of the video. It's the credits, shown in the order of appearance. For me, it was important to bake this information directly into the film, rather than the information being separated. For one, it's just a hint to the nature of the content. If someone was unsure about the nature of the visuals, this at least should give them a hint to where it's from, and that it is something that I consider to be found footage. The other reason is that it's also a hint to the temporality of the work, because in the end, I think that this video essay only works the way it does today. And I mean that literally. The aesthetic of the video, the aesthetic of the splat scene, and also of the AI renderings, they will be fundamentally different in a couple of months from now. People are doing research to improve the efficiency of this rendering approach to prevent the glitches that caught my attention in the first place. Before I finished the video 3 months ago, new papers already were published that reduced the artifacts, for example. New papers were published that just reduced the file size and increased performance. But also new papers were published that connected the approach to generative AI. And lastly, papers were published that made Gaussian splats not so static anymore. I think that if this someday, if ever, goes mainstream in some form, all the technological and aesthetic rawness I witnessed will be hidden in a polished black box. The rendering approach will then try to hide ambiguity too, and make it challenging to reach its fuzzy borders again. That's what I mean when I consider the temporality of a piece important. It's because everything I have shown already feels nostalgic to me. The moment I started documenting this technology, it already felt outdated. That's why I call us future art historians in the video. We are interrogating these digital artifacts in the space of their emergence. Having said that, and just before I end the talk, just one more thing about the second part of the title of this talk, where I already talked about where the color of the sky is rendered, but I also think that the sky's color is just a nice metaphor for a remembered truth. When we think about the sky's color, there is this general consensus that it's blue, because that's what we learned at school, and because most of us imagine a bright, sunny day. But in reality, the answer is that it depends on time, place, perspective, and even mood, because in our memories, any certainty can easily be clouded. If it's not important for our personal narrative, the weather becomes a footnote at the fringes of attention. Was the sky really that blue on that day 2 years ago? Does it even matter? So yes, I hope the color of the sky remains lossless for all of us. Thank you so much for listening and watching. And as said, you can watch the whole thing later here if you want to.
Artur Neufeld, thanks for presenting this nice arts project and for your philosophical views on the technology behind it. So let's start with our questions and answers session. Anything from the internet? No. Then line up the microphones and ask your questions, please. Everybody's stunned, speechless, questionless. Is it true? Somebody coming here? Microphone number 2, please.
Yeah, hi, I'm Martin. I'm a neuroscientist, and I used Polycam extensively to document the art of the sculptor Tom Sachs, a friend of mine. And I just want to say I found your perspective, especially because I did this in 2017, I think, 2020. I found your perspective immensely valuable and inspiring, and connected with memory. I just want to thank you for your amazing talk. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Also, a small thanks from the audience, but somebody in the internet has a question. Please go ahead.
So the internet mirrors the sentiment of this being an amazing talk with interesting and rare facts. The question is, for how long did you collect all the information and the visuals? How long did this journey take you?
3 months. From the finish, like when the people asked me to participate in the group exhibition, I just like spent 24 hours, like 12 hours a day just working on this. So I had a deadline. So at that point, I already knew that this is the material I wanted to work with. And then it was just like anorexic art, right? Just like pulling through the hours and just like getting it done by the end of the deadline. So 3 months in total.
Thanks. Any more questions? Well then, thanks again, Artur Neufeld, for this presentation.